everyone. In this session today, we are going to go over BYD-ification, how to make ByDesign your own. Don't be scared of personalization. So we're going to do a whole bunch of different personalizations in the application. So hopefully you'll be able to potentially find some more data and get things in a format that you like to look at, and find some interesting things today. So always remember, personalization is your friend. There's very little as a user that you can do in ByDesign that you can't back out of. So I would suggest just play around with some of the different features and functions that we look at today if you haven't learned them already, and we will, and I hope you enjoy them. So we're going to look at first simply changing your background color, and then we're going to go into just modifications of some things. How do we put the modification of your launchpad, how to modify your overview dashboards. We did a separate session on this a while back. You can look for it on the Q&A Café on the YouTube page to get some more details, because we're just going to brush over it kind of quickly today. And then we're going to spend some good time on work lists. So how to add fields into like the filters, how to add fields into the different screens on the actual tables, and then we'll create some queries, how we make those defaults. And then we'll go into a little bit more of advanced features on the grouping, sorting, and summing of tables. And then we'll do a little bit more in the same action on some transaction screens. So how do we change the layout of some of our screens, and how do we hide and show different fields? You might find that as you move forward with ByDesign, that there's some fields that you don't necessarily need, or they always default right and they just take up space, and we'll show you how to hide and show those. All right, so let's get started. All right. So right now I've got a very, very blank screen on my financial user. So the first thing that we're going to do is just change the background color. If you don't like the default blue theme that SAP has to offer, there's two different functions that you can utilize to change the background. One is if you go into My Settings and you click on the Appearance tab, there's all kinds of new background images that are in here. So there's a high contrast black, white, quartz light, and quartz dark. I'll just change one to the high contrast black so you can sort of see what that looks like when we do change it. So you'll see it's a very drastic difference. Like I think I mentioned in another session that when you do change to a different one of these themes, if you will, within the system, things like your alerts and anything that you have in like the stoplight things, which are green, yellow, red, they don't show up. They just show up as symbols now. So you just they're not as visually eye-catching as they used to be in these high contrast screens. So I am going to change this back to the Belize just so we can look at changing just the background color. But it might be nice, if you have a test system and a productive system, some of our support team will change that for you, so you know the difference between the test and the production. But if you just want to change it on your own, you can go into the Start Personalization. You want to do this; it's only available from the Launchpad. And then if you right click on the background design, you can enter a valid RGB value. So that's a CSS value that nobody really knows what numbers to place in there off the top of their head. So we can always go into just that palette mode. There's the fancy default colors, and then you can go into maybe a more color. So if I wanted to change this maybe to a lighter aqua or something like that, I can just select any of the colors. I do highly recommend going to a light shade. The darker ones kind of make it a little headachy, if you will. And so when I do change this, it's automatically going to update, and you can see again that seemed like it was really light on the screen, and it wound up being quite bright. So we'll just change that again to maybe even just a lighter hue over here. All right, now that's nice and fancy. And so anytime that we make any changes to our launchpad or any of our screens, you'd want to go ahead and save. If you don't like what you've done, you can go ahead and just discard those changes. And then everything you've done is going to revert back to the original. So you can always, that's why I said, you can never mess anything up. You can always go back. And then if you're actually in your mode where, let's say I'm adding a group and I misspell like, well, tax instead of tasks, and I save it, I can always, again, just discard those changes. All right. And so moving along, just to kind of, as we still have that personalization screen open, you've got your different options for the launchpad to be able to add different types of features and KPIs and tiles and things like that. If you want to hide full entire groups, it's just a matter of clicking on and off, and that will that'll remove those groups. Okay. And then if I want to add a new group, like let's say we want to add maybe the Quicklinks. So we're going to add some Quicklinks, and then we're going to add 2 groups just so you can see the different types of stuff that we can add onto our dashboard. So we've got our KPIs, and then let's say we've got tasks. All right. And so now we've got 3 different sections. If I want to move any of those around, maybe the KPIs are the most important thing, and I want to move those to the top, it's just a matter of doing a drag and drop, and then I can save that as well to add any sort of KPIs in here. And you'll also notice, depending on how busy you want your launchpad, this is going to add dynamic toolbar tasking for you to be able to quickly jump to those different sections on your launchpad. But if I wanted to add some KPIs, I mean, you'll see you've got all of your KPIs in here. So maybe just add a couple in here. We'll look at overdue amounts and overdue receivables. And so just by pinning those onto your dashboard, those will now appear onto your screen. And then again, just by dragging and dropping, you can resequence those. If I wanted to even move it down into another area, it's just as easy as kind of moving it in and out of the different sections. Okay. And then clicking on the quick links, so that's your shortcuts. Every single work center that you have access to is going to give you different quick links. So either like maybe your account lists or your invoices to be open sales orders, things like that. So if I wanted to look at maybe my sales order list, or if I'm in sales and I want to create a new sales order and a new corporate account, those are kind of 3 quick links that are going to take me straight to those different areas within the system. But the one thing you'll notice as I bring in this quick link here, you've got something that just says lists. And if we were in our areas, I put in that sales orders, you'd see that it's the sales orders list. So in a lot of the different work centers, there are multiple lists, and this will come out as just list. And without knowing what that is, you don't want that necessarily to get confusing for you of which list you're going to be jumping into. So it's very easy for us to just change what the title is of these different tiles. So if I click on the tile and I right click, you can do a quick hide and show, you can delete the tile, but then I can also just change this to sales order list. So now it's much more meaningful for me. And then once you click out of it, that's now going to be updated. So it makes it a lot more meaningful for you as the user to know exactly where you're going to be going in the system. Now, the other area that's also pretty intriguing in your tasks is not just the shortcuts that are going to take you and navigate you to something like a shortcut within the system, but there's also different quick links. So just like you have at the top of the screen by default, your open items and open alerts and tasks and things like that, within each of the different work centers, there are default lists as well that are going to notify you to how many things you have in a particular list that you need to work on. So really, it's like your exception-based management tool. So maybe if I go down to like my supplier invoicing and I want to look at, all of my deliveries to be invoiced or all orders to be invoiced. and then any maybe open and documents with exceptions. So those are pretty important, important different tiles that apply to me as an AP person. Once I go back and I save these, I apply that, and we'll save this. What makes this different from the Quicklinks list is because it's pulling directly from the work lists within the system, is showing you exactly how many things you need to do. So I find that if I find the lists that I like that are going to a particular work list, I tend to go more towards the task list as opposed to the shortcuts list, unless it's creating new documents quickly, because I find this is a lot more meaningful to tell me what do I really have to do today. So that, in a nutshell, is going to be how we change our launchpad around the different types of functions that are available within the work list or within the launchpad. The other thing that you may or may not have noticed as you tool around ByDesign is that every single work center has an overview screen. So as I navigate down, you'll see, like, from general ledger, I've got an overview, fixed assets, I have an overview. So within each of these different areas, I can configure a personalized dashboard that's specific to that particular area within the system. So you have a lot more, again, more meaningful, quick access to reports that are important to you as it pertains to each of those different work centers. Then if I just look at maybe the overview of the supplier invoice again as an example, you'll always see some content by default, things like your documents to be processed, the invoice entry. And so these things will be your different work lists that are available by default in a particular work center view. So within invoice entry, you'll see it corresponding to any of the default views that I have within this drop-down list are going to correspond to the work lists within the overview screen. Right, oops, go back to that. Here. And so again, you've got your work. There's 3 different work center views that are in there. So your work, the documents that need to be processed, your invoice entry, and the invoice and credit memos. And then if we want to add some more content on here, again, we want to go into that personalization mode. And if we scroll over a little bit, we'll see a little add button. And so if I want to, again, add some of the same types of content in here, we'll see a new option that pops up here as an embedded list that we can embed as cards. And so on our KPIs, maybe we want to look at, oops, let's look at AP. We don't have that. Oops. Oh. We'll just open up one. Let's look at contract invoiced here. So these are different supplier invoices that pertain to a contract. So we have that available to us. And then if I want to change the sequence of these, again, it is just a drag and drop. Now, the one thing that's a little wild here that I've noted, that you'll notice, is that it's responsive design. So if you get it looking great and in the format that you want to on one screen, and you go to another larger screen, it might resequence a little bit because the tiles are dynamic and different in sizes and things like that. But I can pull in things like the contract invoice, and then you'll see, depending on the different content, and let me add another thing here. So I added a KPI, but let's add a report in here. And we'll do the AP. All right, so we'll add the accounts payable open items. And so as you add in the different reports, you'll notice that you can add in one or more of the same report. So you might have the same type of report that you like to run, but you want to run it in different types of views. You can add 3 or more of the same ones and then just configure them to have the different default views and selections that you like to look at, and they can all be in one screen. So it saves you a little bit of time from running the report and toggling back and forth between a lot of different things. So I always kind of look at that, potentially sometimes multi-company, if you want to look at the trial balance across multiple companies and have those sequenced side by side. in the different report views, you can do that. All right. And then again, you've got, if there were quick links in there, you would see those, but there's none. And then embedded, oh wait. Oops. So you've got your different quick links again. So the quick links that are pertaining, they're specific to the supplier invoice. So if I wanted to put my tasks and invoice entry and the invoice and credit memos in there, and then any other embedded lists that might not be on the dashboard by default. So things like the latest news if you're using corporate feeds. And so you see in your work, you've got your open tasks, and that's going to be, again, correlated back to your launchpad. So if I wanted to look at it, potentially would be linked directly to these different tasks that you had if you pulled that into your view on the supplier invoicing. Now, if I wanted to change the look and feel of the different content that's in here, so this looks really ugly because it's just a lot of numbers and they're all scrunched up and I want to see it in a different view, or if I want to see what other types of information I have on my cards. So I've got my card with, or my cards, and then here are the different notifications that I have for my inbox. And then I can also see other content that's in here that I haven't added into my screen. So maybe closed items that I wanted to look at. The same thing would happen with your, the quick links on, that are specific to this work center. So you've got all of your different top work lists in here, and I can pull in from each of these different work center views. Actually, sorry, we were in supplier invoicing. Let me go back into here. Sorry. So if we were in like documents to be processed, we'll see that that's now filtered down just to supplier invoicing and works that's documents to be processed. If I moved these out, so if I took that out of my work list, I would then be able to, that would then appear back on the bottom of my list that I can pull back into the screen. Typically what I found is most of the work centers or most of the work center dropdowns are going to be here already by default. And then when you want to change your view, you can just apply those as well. And then you can also change the card width. So if I wanted that as more of a medium-sized card width, I can do that, and that will make it a little bit bigger. So the same type of concept is works with the KPI. So any of your KPIs, you'll always see, just to tell the difference between the KPIs and the reports, you'll always see sort of a number up at the top and a heading, and then sometimes you'll see graphical representation too, depending on the settings that you have. And then on your reports, you're just going to see a title at the top. Right. So on the KPI side, you have a lot of the same content that you would on the task list, but you've got a few more things. So you can say, I want it narrow, or maybe I want it medium or wide. It's going to show me the KPI name, and then I can decide whether I want to display it with a context report or not. So if I change it to collapse, then that graph will automatically disappear. And then if I want to show other sort of additional values, maybe I want to show the percent of the target and the percent reference. And then I also can set the refresh rate. So every time I log back, move back into the screen, that's going to show me, or that's going to automatically refresh, as opposed to doing it every hour or a couple hours or things like that. And then last is the actual report side. And so you'll see, maybe I want to change this to a wide report. And then you'll notice in here that you've got, maybe I want to see my dashboard of open accounts payable for the dashboard. So you can choose your own selections. I will always recommend, if you're going to be setting up these dashboards, set up the views that you want in the reports list first, and then it's really easy for you to configure the dashboards very easily. And then I can show my different view as well. Maybe I want to look at Open AP by supplier for my dashboard, and I can apply that. And then you'll see that that list open up, and now it's going to change from more of the numbers based to more of a graphical representation of those numbers. And then again, I can save that however I want to. And anytime I want to, again, resequence anything, I can just drag and drop that over to where I want to. And if I want to remove it, it's just clicking on the X to get it out of your list. Great. So next up, we are going to move into, so we went through modifying the launchpad, modifying your overview dashboards. Now we're going to go into Worklist. I find that the Worklists are probably a much underutilized area for some quick types of reporting that you may or may not be able to get to, or I found when I work with customers that they aren't aware that you can do these things on your own, that you don't need really an administrator to do that. And you can find a lot of really good information out of these work lists. It's almost like a quick report without having to run the report, but then it allows you to do things. So it allows you to do your functions. So we're going to go through adding fields, creating queries, grouping, sorting, summing of our different areas. So we'll start in the supplier invoicing and the invoice entry screen. And first, just to quickly note to you, if you haven't played around with this or haven't noticed, this isn't necessarily a Uification, but it's also a nice little quick tool if you're trying to find things and you have a lot of data, or maybe you have a lot of locations, a lot of companies, lots of suppliers, a lot of different types of entities. If you open up, and in a lot of areas in the system, there are these different, this different option called the open filter bar. So rather than having to create the advanced filter, there's just quick areas in here. So I can look at my invoicing status. I can look at the supplier and the buying company. So very quickly, I can look at things that are, not invoiced for AMS for products company. Or if I wanted to look at, both American made, just by clicking on the control button and selecting multiples. And here I can select each of those, and that's going to quickly filter out my list. So if you do have maybe a pile of supplier invoices that you get from one supplier and you have to sort through them, this is a really nice and easy way to create those ad hoc type queries. Right. And so as if I want to start the personalization, you'll notice again, if I jump into personalize, in this area, you've got just by default, the unnamed table and then invoiced entry. As I hover over the different options in here, you'll see that blue bar will appear. So you know exactly where you're going to be editing your screens. So if I go into, my invoice entry as an example, you'll see that I can add in different things like a supplier ID or created on, and those will add in new columns into my table. What I also have the ability to do is resequence these. So just by clicking on the table header and dragging and dropping, I can resequence these. So maybe I am more interested in the delivery status than the invoice status, and then the order date and the created on than anything else. So I can just change those guys around and save it. And then if I hop back into the main screen, what you'll always want to do if you're making changes to tables or sections or things like that, there's always that one area down. So as you go in and out of the different sections, you'll click on this little arrow button here to be able to maneuver back into the main modification area. There's also other things that you could add in here, like mashups. If your administrators have built some mashups, which are essentially different views into different types of applications or screens that can be embedded onto your main screen, you can add those guys in as well. But then if I wanted to add in on my bottom screen here, so to this unnamed table, I can do the same type of function in here. So if I want to look at it by, look at my product category, I can do the same type of function. So I can drag and drop and then save that guy. And the other area as well, you'll notice again, if I go in just to default into the screen, I'm only going to see this unnamed table and invoice entry. Now, depending if your organization has used or has created the custom fields and things like that you might want to drop into here, you may find that there's other fields that you want to add into the screens to be able to use for filters. So you'll see again, as I open this up, these options now become available. So I've got my general data. We can just kind of flip in and out. I don't think there's going to be anything else that I want to hide or show in here. From the item data, no. In some instances, you may find, like during releases, when some of our influence ideas have taken effect, you will find that other fields do magically appear in here. So I always kind of look at the release notes, and they do call out where you will see new filter screens and new names in there. And then if I want to, in any of these screens, so if I want to move these around, maybe it's more important that the supplier sales order ID is up front, or if I don't even really care because I'm not capturing the supplier sales order ID, I can just make that invisible by clicking the visible button. And then maybe I want to put the total gross value down. I can just drag and drop and resequence those so I can have the more important things that I'm typically searching on high and mighty into my screen. The one thing to note is that with any of the resequencing options, you don't have to necessarily be in the section that you are, but you can't move fields like from buying company name. I can't move it over to here. I can only move things up and down within the section that the logical section that they're in. Right. That's personalization in here. And so if I want to create any sort of queries, any of my different drop downs, you'll see SAP gives you a ton of different drop downs by default, but that might not be everything that you want to see. So maybe I want to look at all orders. Now, typically, I always, if I'm doing a search, I'm setting up a filter, like my own type of filter, I'll always start from the all. So I've noticed that depending on which dropdown, like a pre-configured one from SAP, there may be things hard-coded in the background, like to something like my orders or my leads, my opportunities, things like that are all hard-coded in there that you can't remove. So you want to go into all orders. So then you can have that field, that search selection wide open. And so if I wanted to look at potentially everything that's been delivered and not invoiced as an example, I can pop into my delivery status. So you'll see that I've got in my drop down, I've got lots and lots of different options in here. And we're not limited in these different searches to just one option. If you click on the little filter in the button, we can say, all right, equal to completely delivered, and then add our option equal to, not relevant potentially. And then, but I want to exclude something that's equal to not delivered. And those can automatically be my filters. So that'll be my completely all of my completely delivered options that are ready to be invoiced, and then I can show it as not invoiced in there. So now that becomes a new saved search for me. And for me then, to every time that I go and log into the system, I now can save this as received not invoiced. And then I can choose to execute a query on selection, which I always choose unless you have millions and millions and millions of lines of data, and then use as the default query. And so that will then become your default selection every time you log into there. So you can make that exactly just the way that you want it from a Worklist standpoint. And if you ever want to maintain those, if I was in here and maybe I wanted to change these on here, I can actually, anything that I create myself, I can remove very easily. Again, you can always select or change what your default is. So I can change the default just by selecting on those, so all orders to be invoiced. And then you can impact on the execute on selection. I find that, again, by default, when you first get your ByDesign solution, most of these execute upon selections are going to be unticked, which then leads you to have to do an extra click when you're in there to say click for results, which can get pretty annoying. And you're like, why do I always have to do that? that'll get you around that. And now within your work list, if you are, again, working, you've got some default groupings in here. So if I want to group by supplier name or by company, you've got different options. Now, when I move in and out of the screen, that's going to pop back into default. But if you want to always have a grouping of something like, let's say, by supplier, and then you want to see at a quick glance potentially all the open payables that are waiting to be posted, or all the invoices that are waiting to be posted, we can do some sums in here. But going back into the personalization mode, popping into the invoice entry, you don't have to go into that screen. We just want to right click on the table. You'll see that you've got two options in here. One, the display table settings. So I can change this now to look a little different. If I want to display the grid lines or just the vertical grid lines or none, I can change the views in there to make it, I don't know, a little bit more streamlined. And then your export columns, you can choose to say, okay, give me all of the export columns that are available in this query, or just the ones that I've pulled into my work list. So sometimes if you're doing some mass data maintenance, or if you're doing some other further reporting, you might want to pull in a lot more than what you actually see on the screen. So you can change that out. And so that will then export all of your columns. So you see how that kind of changes a little bit. And then if I click on that again, and I go into sorting and grouping, this is where I can get some kind of fun little options in here. If I want to, I have this by order ID. I can change any of these. I can do it by potentially my invoicing status first. And so just by selecting one or more or all of these and then moving the buttons over here, clicking them over, and then I can select move up to the top or down. And if I change that now and we refresh, we'll see that not invoiced is at the top. And now they're sorted by invoicing status and then by the order ID. However, if I wanted to get something a little bit more fancy, I can do some initial grouping, and there's going to be some defaults that aren't really impactable by you of your initial groups. And so if I want to do my supplier, my grouping by supplier name, I can change that. All right. And then when I refresh that guy, you'll now see that by default, that's always going to be on my different groups, right? Okay, so that is the grouping mechanism. And then we'll go into just in the transaction screen. So it's very, very similar in nature. If I'm in, I always use contracts as an example because there's a lot of people that are using contracts that have different options in here. So if we're looking at kind of the grouping by account, again, you'll see in a lot of the different areas, not only do you have the table display settings and the sorting and grouping, like I just showed you, you also have an option for table calculations. So in this example, we don't necessarily have even a table calculation properly in there. But this can do counts and things like that. So if you want to see how many open contracts, if it's not already counted, we'll show you that. But if I'm in a particular contract itself, so let's see, let's look at our items in here. And we'll find one that has a few different items. So if we pop into here, we'll go through a couple different options. Again, like I showed you on the filters, how I can hide and show different things. If I want to always by default show the ship to contact, I can pull that information in. If it's some function that I'm not necessarily using, or just that it's not important necessarily to me on a daily basis, like this is revenue accounting contract is more important for the finance people, so they want to have that in their screen, they can hide that. If I'm selling more products and service level stuff and I don't want to show that information, or the order statistics, I can hide any of that information. Then you'll see that screen scrunches up pretty nicely in there. And then if I want to, again, resequence any of these fields, so if I want to move distribution channel up, if that's more important to me, it's just a drag and drop there. And then moving into any of the different options, so the organizational assignment, you'll see that the seller is something that's available in here, but maybe I don't care about the contract administrator as an example. I can move that information in and out of the different screens very easily. Now I'm going to move over to the item side of the house. Again, you'll see this table calculation. And so you'll see this either in this area, or in a lot of times you'll see that also in your work list. And I'll show you in one of the other work lists where we can add that in as well. So I've got my different table calculations in here. So this is a nice new feature. So I've got my list price. Actually, let's add one little option into our table. We do have our net value. Let's remove discount and term, and we'll save that just so we can see everything on the screen very easily. All right, so hopping back into this unnamed table in here, we'll go into our table calculation. And so you'll see that in here, you've got different types of calculations. So you've got your quantity. Maybe I want to sum the quantity. I want to sum the net price. I don't care about the net price because that's just the unit, but I do want to look at the net value. So I'm going to look at the sum in here. And so this will, you can choose your option to count the table entries if you want to see exactly how many lines are in that particular transaction. You can just display intermediate results, or you can display the results. So by default, I'm going to show you the difference between these guys. So if I display the results row at the top of the table, I find this is valuable when you're in a data entry screen. If you show the results at the bottom, I'll show you what that looks like. And how it's a little bit annoying when you're trying to do this. It's great when you're, let's refresh this guy. All right, so here's where you're seeing now I sum the quantity in here, and then I sum the net value. And I'll show you how it's kind of annoying when you add a new row in there. It then kind of, you're sort of flipping up and down in the screen, as opposed to if you're used to maybe tabbing over to open up a new row, it starts underneath and then it flops itself back up again. So what I typically do when I'm in the tables and in the screens, I've got my table calculations in here. And so what I do is I take those and I display those results at the top of the table. And so it makes it much easier. That's always going to give me the net value and things like that. But it just flips the data around. Right. So now you see that that's going to be at the top. And then if I want to add new rows in there, it's very easy for me. So it doesn't hip hop around from underneath the total to in between the total and the next line items. So let's go back in there again, just to show one more option. Let's see if I've got another item in here that has multiple. Probably not. Let's see. I thought I had one that had a couple in here. Anyway, let's pop into just this guy. Now your other options, so if I want to go back into my personalization mode, you've got your different table grouping. So I can display intermediate results for sorted columns. So if I went back into my sorting and grouping, so I've got item ID as an option in here. So if I chose that, then every item that I had in my contract would deliver me a different table calculation. So let's actually go out of here into, let's go into a different work list to show how that works when we have multiple options. And so a good place to show that is going to be, let's just go into sales orders here. So if we go back into personalization here, and we've got our sorting and grouping. So let's say we want to sort by the account and then by status as an example. So that's going to show me my different sorts. And then if I try to do my different table calculations, I've got my different options. So you've got your total, and let's do the sum. And then if I do display intermediate results for the sorted columns and apply that, it's going to show me results and sub-results in here. Because it's going to show me, first of all, by, let's see, did I do that? Hold on, let's double check that I did that right. Yep, sum. And then let's see, let's cancel out of here and we'll stop this and we'll go in and out. And we should see that refresh with our right data. Actually, it is not. I don't know if that's not working. Interesting. Let's go back into there again and see what we did wrong in here. Let's do our initial group here and let's see if that's going to do the trick here. Okay, let's stop that and refresh it. All right, there we go. So now it's going to do my grouping by the accounts. It's going to show me all my accounts, and then it's going to show me again all of the status that it's in, and it should sort all of that. And then it should be giving me a subgrouping underneath of each of those. So I would see essentially the account and then the subgroups. I might have to play around with that a little bit. Not quite sure why it's not working exactly the way it should. But if you wanted to change those, so if you want to display the intermediate results for sorted columns with the exception of something like the account, I can select those and then apply it. And then that would change how that looks. So I would then be omitting multiple, multiple subsets of different details of the table calculations. Right. So again, this is where, again, I find for myself, that the doing the table calculations at the bottom of the screen works out much better than putting it at the top on my work list. It just makes it seems a little less confusing for me than putting it at the top of the screen. So like I said, if I'm in a transaction screen, I typically put it at the top. And then if I'm in more of a work list screen, I'm putting my calculations and my tables at the bottom. Right. Okay, so that takes us to the end of this session. So how to just beautify and make ByDesign your own and personalize it a little, and hopefully add in a little bit more data than maybe you're seeing by default. As an administrator, if any of you are administrators on the phone, you also can impact what all of your users are seeing within the adaptation mode of the screen. So the same concepts apply if I'm in as a key user. I can change how this looks and acts. I can also create new drop downs. So if I use any of these different filters, if I create any new filter in adaptation mode and I save it, then all of my users get to take advantage of it, which makes it really nice. You don't have to have them create their own information over and over again for every one of the different users. You can deploy in a company standard type defaults as well. All right, so that takes us to the end of this session, and I hope you learned maybe a nugget or two of a new trick within the system, and we will catch up with you next week for our next topic. Thanks, bye-bye.